What shirt is this from?
So this is Schalke, which is a team in Germany. Yeah, I mean, right from the very beginning, football has been class conflict and divisions between different parts of England. And then later on the World Cup, and you have, of course, Trump's America, Putin's Russia, Qatar. In China, people love betting, love gambling. It's deeply in the culture, but gambling companies are illegal. One of the ways to get around that is by sponsoring English football clubs. In 2010 in South Africa, the whole team imploded. They all fell out. And then there were lots of things about, this is why migration and this is all, it's not working. And it's like, football reflects people's politics back at them, I think.
2, 1, rolling.
This is StoryCo, the podcast about the business of story and storytelling. I'm James Kirkham. Let's get into it. My guest today started out reporting politics in Westminster, then trained as a statistician studying online scams. An odd path until you see what he did with it. He turned a forensic eye on the one object almost every person on earth recognises: a football shirt. Travelling the world reading the stories stitched into jerseys. A German club's shirt that mapped Europe's addiction to Russian gas. A Colombian kit carrying a dead cartel boss's face. An Italian team's badge hiding a $4 billion fraud. His book, More Than a Shirt, became a Guardian and Waterstones Book of the Year. And along the way, his reporting on football's crypto and gambling schemes ended up cited in Parliament. We talk about soft power, dirty money, and why the thing on your back says more about the world than you think. But first, Joey, tell me a story.
Yeah, so I want to tell a football story, and I thought quite hard about this, and I thought my favourite football story by a mile is one involving Carlisle United in the lower reaches of English football, not a team that I support. Carlisle United were a long and storied English team. They had been in the English Football League for the best part of a century. They'd never been relegated. And then in 1999, they were about to get relegated. It was all going wrong. They had to win at home at this game. I think it was against Plymouth Argyle, and they were drawing 1-1. Or they weren't winning, and in the last minute, they got a corner, and the goalkeeper, you might see where this is going, there's a man called Jimmy Glass, and he was a complete nobody. He was on loan from Swindon Town. No one had heard of him, never done anything in his career particularly, and in the 94th minute, the corner goes in, bobbles around, and you just see Jimmy Glass volley the ball into the net, and just the entire Carlisle United crowd run onto the pitch. It's the kind of thing that happens like once in a decade somewhere in the world, of a goal, not just a goalkeeper scoring a goal, but a goalkeeper scoring the most important goal in Carlisle's history. And you just see the kind of absolute delirium in the stadium. And just there's a kind of YouTube video which cuts in these fans who have followed them the whole life, just talking about the best day of their lives. And I just think it's the most magical, brilliant, wonderful thing.
I think it's gorgeous. You're immediately surmising, what it is about football. But this chat, I couldn't be more excited by. We hear a lot about people saying, keep politics out of football, but it's always been there, right?
Yeah, right from the very beginning, football has been sort of class conflict and divisions between different parts of England. And then later on the World Cup, and you have, of course, recently the Trump's America, Putin's Russia, Qatar. But going back to 1934, the World Cup was in Mussolini's Italy, a propaganda vehicle for a fascist state. 78, Argentina, under military dictatorship, incredibly political. Gosh. There was sort of torture going on down the road when the World Cup final was taking place. So the World Cup has always been incredibly political. Football has always been deeply political. But I think it's more so now. It's more in the everyday conversation of football fans than it used to be. I think you have nation states owning clubs, and it's also just so much bigger than it's ever been, I think. I think people underestimate that. You look back to your childhood and football being on TV, but there's so much. Football is so bigger in the UK than it was 20 years ago. More people go to it, more people follow it. It's bigger around the world than it's ever been. And it's kind of the one universal thing in the world, really.
Oh, absolutely.
Nothing else comes close.
The ultimate common denominator. Now, you started your career in political journalism, right? Does it feel natural bedfellows? Tell us a little bit more about
really.
your past.
It was never the plan. And I studied politics. I loved politics, specifically like British, the Westminster stuff. I started working with the BBC just after the Brexit vote. So September 2016. And, Theresa May was just Prime Minister. And all this chaos about this never-ending drama. And I was a sort of researcher, so I was getting deep in the weeds of the Brexit legislation, a real expert and all that stuff. But then also running around with microphones, chasing prime ministers and all that sort of stuff, which was really fun. And I loved it. But I think I never quite was obsessed with it enough. I think I kind of realised that over time. It didn't quite scratch something in me. I saw the people who I really admired who were 10, 20 years ahead of me. And I was like, I don't think I'm obsessed with this, as obsessed with this as they are. And I was also obsessed with football, but just as a fan, I never crossed my mind to do it professionally. And then, a few things. I moved to BuzzFeed, which was a big sort of career decision to cover politics there. The whole thing imploded. I got sacked by some American guy on Zoom 10 weeks in, and had no job during the pandemic, and it was pretty terrifying. And then, the editor of The Athletic just messaged me out of the blue and said, "Do you like football? We're thinking of hiring someone sort of doing politics, doing investigations." And I was like, "Wow, never even thought of that." But I mean, do I like football? I mean, it's the most important thing. I love it. I've been an Aston Villa fan since I was old enough to talk. I've been going to games, obsessed with it. But then sort of applying that political journalism onto football I love it.
And did The Athletic afford you, though, the time, again, to be able to lean into it more versus that slightly chaotic political Brexit kind of carnage of grabbing those spots and moments, irrespective of where your true passion was? Were you allowed to, frankly, write in longer form and spend more time?
And they were great, and that was very much my remit. And I did some big investigations into
go on, give us some flavour.
Sort of shady Asian gambling sponsors that all over the Premier League a few years ago with these sort of Chinese writing on shirts, and that was all about the story of how in China people love betting, love gambling. It's deeply in the culture, but gambling companies are illegal. One of the ways to get around that is by sponsoring English football clubs, wearing billboards, and then through some extremely shady places like Cambodia, Vietnam, there are links to organised crime, basically. And I did a lot about cryptocurrency and some pretty shady stuff there, but really trying to sort of look underneath the rock.
Was that the first time? Did you realise you were moving towards something that you had a particular interest in beyond football? There was a layer and a depth to what you're describing there that's exploratory and investigative, and the real journalist coming out in you and the writer.
Yeah, I think it was the first time that I really felt I was doing something original, and that's probably why I love this, and why the politics thing actually never really scratched the itch. Is I always wanted. I was just sort of chasing the hamster wheel. I wasn't telling original stories. I could have, so I wasn't saying anything new, and I really that's what I wanted to do always. I think without maybe quite realizing it, and then for the first time I was like, wow. I had sort of MPs ringing me up, and then it was normally me contacting them for things, but then it was like I was giving evidence in Parliament about how this whole world works, and people from law enforcement.
Come on, let's not skip over that. That's a brilliant segue as well. So you had spent your time hounding and looking for the story.
Yeah,
from
I wouldn't say they were hounding me, but I was called to give evidence a couple of times about, because I was not many people had properly looked into this world, and it takes a long time to get your head around it, and I did, and there's a lot of interesting stuff there.
So there's a severity to doing that, though, suddenly being called to effectively detail in Parliament on such hallowed turf, if I shouldn't use that expression.
Although
there's a seriousness to that. Right?
Yeah, and it is serious, and apart from it's the only time I've worn a suit apart from at weddings and stuff in my life, and I thought about it carefully on what I was going to say, but I think when you really know what you're talking about, and I sort of immodestly did, and I'd really looked into it, and I knew my stuff, so I didn't particularly feel nervous. I do feel nervous at the times I've been, not here, but being thrown onto media, not quite knowing what I'm talking about, and that is terrifying. But if you know what you're talking about, I'm always quite relaxed, I think.
And I find it interesting that you said you think this is far more readily understood from the common
definitely
punter fan. Tell us more about that, because I think I'm inclined to agree.
Well, I just think if you're just some ordinary person who likes supporting your team and not particularly interested in politics, you've had Roman Abramovich in Chelsea, Manchester City with Abu Dhabi, the Newcastle deal in Saudi Arabia. Qatar, PSG have just won the Champions League twice, owned by the state of Qatar. You had the World Cup in Qatar. You had Trump and all this stuff during the World Cup.
So you can't miss it.
No, it's just in your face, and people are talking about it down the pub in a way I don't think there were 20 years ago. Like, there were political undercurrents to football, but it's completely in your face and unavoidable. And I don't think that's a particularly good thing, but it means that there's more space for people like me, I guess.
That's really interesting. So funnily enough, and we spoke just before we started, that I came to Villa Park just before Christmas. It was Michael Oliver refereeing. And the sophisticated nature of the aggro that the United away fan was giving Oliver about his links to refereeing in the Saudi league.
Yeah, well, he's a Newcastle fan, so people,
But it was so nuanced and layered.
Yeah.
But to your point, it's so far away from maybe the kind of thing that would be shouted at that ref 20 years ago.
Well, I think that it's easier to access information now, right? So if someone gave a dubious decision against your team 10 years ago, you'll see that on social media. People live in this world where they're constantly, I think it's now people are constantly consuming content about their team in a way they weren't before social media. It used to be, you'd go on the Saturday, you might read the papers, you might have a midweek
Yeah.
game, but you weren't just this sort of 24-hour
Yeah.
transfer rumours and conspiracy theories about what happened last weekend. And it is just constant. And I don't think it's particularly healthy, really.
No, it's an insatiable appetite, isn't it? It doesn't seem to be abating at all. I assumed there would be a limit, but it does feel like
No,
it's
and it's
insatiable.
completely global as well. I mean, particularly if you're talking like Manchester United. I mean, so big in Africa and all over the world. And someone once told me that I was in Senegal recently, people use the internet in a slightly different way there. They don't necessarily go on the BBC or the Athletic app. They type Manchester United into Google. And there's just so much rubbish out there from people who are trying to exploit that by making money. And I wrote a story about this actually about Erling Haaland going to Manchester United. Someone writes that, makes a load of money off Google adverts, and that's a sort of business model for someone.
God, how interesting.
But it's just this insatiable demand for information.
Insatiable demand that is on a global scale, but you end up with the local territory nuances. I remember you mentioned the Russia World Cup, and I spent a bit of time there, which with hindsight I loved. We put out a piece of work prior to that saying who's afraid of the Russia World Cup, because actually the noise prior to that tournament was about hooliganism. Now,
I was in Marseille in 2016 as an England fan.
Really?
That was pretty spicy.
That
yeah.
was
and then
lively.
In Russia, nothing. It was all fine.
Yeah, well, and I'm presuming, and you will know better than me, but because, we did a doc and Putin had effectively removed all the hooligans to ensure that the tournament looked as joyous, and it was joyous, as a carnival kind of atmosphere. But you do this all the time. You spend your time in all of these wonderful different. You mentioned the Senegalese example.
Yeah, Senegal was great. I've just spent a month in South America, so yeah, Argentina.
How was that? Come on.
Amazing, loved it. I mean, I've been to Colombia, but I'd never been anywhere else. I went to Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, Chile. I went to like 25 football matches in a month,
Oh, come
or
on.
something like that. Just every day. I was just like,
This is like everyone's dream, isn't it?
yeah. But I just sort of didn't. I was like, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it properly, and I'm
Yeah.
going to just do as many as I can. And Buenos Aires alone, I went to about 7 or 8.
But I'd love to talk a bit about the Colombian shirt. I think we're on our intro there. We've just said that dead cartel gangster's face. I never knew this. Give us a bit of that flavour.
Yeah, so Colombia was great, and it's also Medellin in Colombia, just a very nice place to visit. It's
Beautiful
like
place, yeah.
just really relaxed and nice food, nice drink. Whereas 30 years ago, it was the most dangerous place in the history of recorded statistics.
Wow.
People would just gun down in the street. It was the cartels, Pablo Escobar, cocaine, and all of that. And now it's so different. But when Escobar, the 80s, it was just incredibly violent. People were just killed all the time. And, cocaine was this, that's an interesting story in itself, this leaf that was a sort of indigenous medicine. And people realized that if you mix it with some other things, you can make this incredibly potent drug. And then people started selling it to New York and Miami and making huge amounts of money. But football, like bread and, someone like Escobar wanted to own a football team, not to make money, because owning a football club, you lose loads of money generally. It made him prestigious, glamorous. It
Really?
meant somewhere to entertain people. And it's not dissimilar to people owning, not to compare them to a massive criminal like that, but the types of people who own football clubs today are not doing it for business reasons. They're doing it because it's glamorous and exciting and prestigious. And I think if you're a billionaire, there's probably all sorts of things you can do with your money. And owning a football club is probably one of the more fun things you can do.
Absolutely, yeah. And tell us about the yellow shirt, the Colombo, and where that comes from.
So the Colombian yellow shirt comes from the gold of the national flag, but that's been really interesting in the World Cup because that's been adopted by this right-wing presidential candidate, and a judge told him to stop campaigning in it because it's this non-partisan symbol, but all his supporters were going to the polls wearing the yellow shirt, which obviously on the surface of it has no political meaning, but it now has this deeply factional meaning, and it means that it's associated with, and this guy won the election on a very narrow sort of 50.5% of the vote. And it's now factional. It's associated with one half of the country and not the other half. And a very similar thing happened in Brazil when Bolsonaro, the right-wing candidate, adopted it as this sort of partisan symbol. And people are sort of deeply, it's like trauma for a lot of people because in both countries, the shirt has been this very non-partisan symbol that everyone can unify behind.
Of course.
And now it's seen as something very partisan.
I struggled with the start of this recent World Cup, and there are a few reasons, but one of them I wondered out loud was about the flag and the use of the flag, which has been kind of used by, I don't know, Reform and Farage and Tommy Robinson and just people who aren't of my political persuasion. I would struggle to show the national flag.
Yeah.
And I was recalling, but when I was a kid, in Italia 90, my favourite ever World Cup still, and I was only 13, was the Union Jack.
Yeah.
That was everywhere and prevalent for starters. But I guess that power struggle over the flag and the identity must be quite common, does it turn out?
Yeah. And Germany's another interesting example because in 2006, when they hosted the World Cup, was pretty much the first time that the German flag had been flown happily and sort of, joyously and uncomplicatedly because, for obvious reasons, for a long time, Germans were quite uncomfortable with any display of patriotism whatsoever.
Yeah.
And then 2006, they hosted the World Cup. They didn't win it, but the German flag was everywhere. And that was a big national moment.
Society and football, as you explore in some of your writing and books, whether it be 3 p.m. kickoff times that originated because of what? The Industrial Revolution, factory closing time?
Yeah. So, and England, particularly the Midlands and the north of England, which is where the first league took off, were the first industries to give people Saturday afternoons off. The 6-day week became a 5.5-day week. And that's why in England...
They were the first. I didn't know that.
Weekends began in industrial England and football came soon after. France, which is a predominantly rural country until much more recently, it was a 6-day week. People were mainly peasants in fields. And so, but football followed weekends, but London was slower to football. No London team won the Premier League until Arsenal in 1931. The East End, the Dockers, they didn't get weekends until later, Saturday afternoons off. So football in London came later than the North and the Midlands.
And then your France point, I think I saw one of your recent pieces of content.
Yeah.
I love this. So that's from a club perspective. And again, a lot of certainly the younger sort of viewers and listeners, I realise France weren't a successful football nation until very recently, right? And you're saying this all comes back to being a rural country.
Football is still, to this day, is nowhere near as big in France as it is.
There's a real apathy, isn't there? Or maybe
I
apathy
think
is the wrong
people like
word.
their country winning, but it's not. I think also, I mean, I've write about this in the book. I've spoken to people in France about this, and they have the cultural. For them, it's literature, it's art, and that sounds a bit, but I think that is deeply ingrained in not just the sort of highly educated classes, but this idea of culture being food, literature, and in Britain we don't really care about food in that sense. We don't view food as sort of culture in the same way, and football, but very urban country. But in France, if you go to a random small French city, people won't care about football that much. Whereas if you go to, Hull have just been promoted to the Premier League, and it's just such a massive deal in a way that if a French city the size of Hull got promoted to Ligue 1, it wouldn't be that big a deal.
But did it cross over? Did the culture, the politics, and ultimately the society cross over? Because now we are witnessing and part of. I remember in '98, and it was a really big thing. And I know you're a little bit younger than me, but you'll definitely recall. And the origins of Zinedine Zidane was a big story, and the notion of the immigrant kind of backdrop was really talked over. Often positively. How, when on all your travels and through your research, are you seeing this as, and in the French team at the moment, beautiful stories of where each where each has kind of originated, but it doesn't seem to be solving much. Whatever.
No, but I think people maybe expect too much of football. Like a team full of immigrants winning a tournament and playing great football is not going to change many people's minds about policy, and I don't think it should. Feel like it has to. No, I don't think we're almost expecting too much of football to solve these, huge social issues. I mean, the French story is very interesting, and it's one I tell in the book. And I went to Bondy, which is where Mbappe is from. The French national team kind of oscillates between being absolutely amazing and absolutely terrible, or has done since '98. And in 2002, they lost against Senegal, embarrassing. And then there were all these things written about French identity and how this thing about, these people from immigrant backgrounds not singing the national anthem. And Algeria played a game in France and there were huge riots. So 2010 in South Africa, the whole team imploded. They all fell out. And then there were lots of things about, this is why migration and this is all, it's not working. And it's like, it's kind of one extreme from the other. So I think it's sort of, football reflects people's politics back at them, I think. I don't think it changes people's politics in a huge way, really.
Well, I thought the US World Cup would be disastrous, but you got a lot of there's literally a meme going around with different edits on TikTok and stuff. I think it says something like maybe it was the politicians that was the problem, and it's just scenes of football fans. Now, to your point, we expect too much of football, but football does unite. I mean, I refer you to the world. The war, the truce at the war at football at Christmas, like it's pretty.
Yeah, although then that was 1914, and then the next few Christmases they're all killing each other. But sorry, that's a bit depressing.
So it didn't.
No, but I used the phrase before. Like, I'm a football optimist. I'm positive about it, and I think there are deep problems with it, and I talk about them a lot. And stuff about finances and sports washing, and But I fundamentally think it's a brilliant thing and that it does more good than it does harm. And I don't just mean that I think some of the I think particularly people always think football was best when they were a teenager. Like we think the music was best when we were a teenager. And I always want to kind of push against that, really. Premier League stadiums weren't full 20 years ago, or not across the board. Football in England is absolutely booming.
So we should be more continually celebratory. Well, where we can, or at least find the positives.
Find the positives, or just how amazing, the World Cup and all these brilliant players, and just the, more than just out of any individual match or tournament, but just the way that football is this universal thing in a way. The world is becoming so much less universal. People don't watch the same TV shows anymore. People don't listen to the same music anymore. I don't know how many songs I'd be able to name from the top 20 in the charts. I'd quite likely be able to name more from the top 20 in 1975.
Same.
Because music is just so fragmented. And what that means is football is almost this one thing that is international and universal, and nothing comes close.
Yeah, I agree. My issue, funnily enough, is more with, the World Cup's been basically made into quarters without anyone asking.
Yeah, that's rubbish, isn't it? Yeah.
or even, and it feels cliche and I almost don't want to spend time on it because it's a cliche conversation of VAR. The VAR bit I am so selfish about. And my selfishness is I'm in a stadium and I do not have a release of joy that I once did because I then sit and wait. Last season, my beloved United, we were away at Arsenal. And my son recalls the story of he's looking for help as we were falling off virtually. And he saw me on a chair because I had a release of emotion knowing it's not going to be turned around instinctively because it was a Cunha 25-yard. It can't be a VAR call. Everything else, I stopped myself.
Yeah.
Now it's taken that from me. It's like, how dare you? Unless you are creating the most perfect conditions of all time, how dare you remove that?
No, it's terrible. I completely agree with you. And I remember Villa Park, I think it was against Crystal Palace, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago. And it was a classic goal that could be VAR'd. It was like, I was right on the other end of the pitch. I was behind the goal and it was really scrappy.
Yeah, you can barely see.
And I just sort of didn't really celebrate. And it was like, I was like, what? And it was a goal. And then I was like, what? That's horrible.
Well, because these are our things.
Yeah.
So the escapism, the catharsis. And, we've gone back.
No, I'd happily get rid of the whole thing, to be honest.
1,000,000%. Yeah. Well, I speak to so many people who are supporters of championship clubs, and they're like, we're quite happy to stay in the championship.
Well, that's what's fun when you watch the FA Cup and, you sort of support a Premier League team and, it feels different.
So that feels like interfering with the product, and that definitely isn't about the show today. Much more in your, I guess, heartland of what you write about so brilliantly is, as you say, something that is almost ubiquitous in the conversation and weirdly everyone's such an expert on is, for example, club ownership models and reasons and whys and wherefores and sports washing and kind of pick a subject. Well, you've got a prop here, haven't you? We say prop. Yeah. Let's start. This is a good place to start. I don't know if the cameras can see. So what shirt is this from?
So this is Schalke, which is a team in Germany, which is... An analogy might be kind of Newcastle United, like a very sort of proud working class kind of the coal community and the sort of pretty deprived these days, Gelsenkirchen in the Ruhr Valley of Germany, but really proud, huge support across Germany.
But they were a much loved club, right?
Yeah, one of the best supported teams in Germany, but have not had a lot of joy in the last few decades, but did have this purple patch. 2007, I think they won the German Cup. They lost the Bundesliga on the last day of the season, this sort of devastating bottle and Bayern won. But they got to the Champions League. So actually lost against Manchester United in 2011. But Schalke was sponsored
who's that on the front? Yeah. For those not football fans or don't know the deal.
So Schalke was sponsored by Gazprom, which is basically an arm of the Russian state. And it was quite a curious matchup because Schalke, it's not close to Russia. In the east of Germany, there have always been strong links to Russia, but Schalke's right in the west near the Netherlands. But basically, it's this sort of fatal embrace between Germany and Russia. Basically, my idea of the book is that football shirts can tell bigger stories. And some of them, oil and gas might be pretty obvious. But one thing that I think is less obvious is the war in Ukraine and also 30, 35 years of post-Soviet history, what happened after the Soviet Union collapsed into its successor states. And Germany needed gas. Germany is a wealthy country but has very few natural resources, has the coal fields where Schalke is, but no gas. So Germany was buying cheap gas from Russia to power German factories and homes for decades. In 2007, Gazprom, effectively an arm of the state, announces this sponsorship deal with Schalke. It's on the shirts. There's a picture of Vladimir Putin and the owner of Schalke holding up the Gazprom shirts. But it was much deeper than just money. It was, 10, 20 million euros a year, helped Schalke become this great team. But also, you'd get the German president and Russian gas executive schmoozing in the box at Schalke. And so it's this deep link. And the Germany Germany was funding this pipeline, which was a big factor in the Ukraine war because it was basically skipping out Ukraine, going directly from Russia to Germany. So there's basically this idea was building up that Germany was becoming too close to Russia and was turning a blind eye to the invasion of Crimea in 2014. And Russia, it kind of gradually happened that Russia became this much more sinister autocratic place. In 2007, it wasn't like that at all, really. It was kind of like, this place is booming. How do we do business with this guy, Mr. Putin? But then in 2022, it all came crashing down really suddenly. And the great sort of football shirt part of this is that when I went there a year later or 18 months later, people had blue stickers over the
I didn't
Gazprom.
know that.
Yeah. So, but not everyone, just a small minority of people, because for a lot of other people, this shirt represents the best days of their lives, the memories of winning the German Cup. They beat Inter Milan in the Champions League quarter-final. It might be, someone said to me, we have relatives who have died, people who are no longer with us, and we have pictures of them with them wearing this. So the idea of just saying, chuck it in the bin and we'll never talk about Gazprom again is too much. And the same with like Newcastle, and I think the Newcastle being owned by the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia is completely outrageous, and it's a propaganda vehicle for a terrible autocratic state. But if you're a Newcastle fan and you've lived your whole life with your team winning nothing, and then you win the League Cup, I find it very difficult to say you should just turn the TV off and write a petition to Amnesty International or whatever. Like, I think that's really hard, and I would find that incredibly difficult if that was my team.
You're sort of describing the story of all of Europe and Russia the last couple of decades through a football shirt, and of course, more than a shirt. That's very much your book. So we've got a wider knowledge base of fans who do hear, and they can't miss it almost. It's on generic radio like a Talk Sport, or it's in books or content that you might be putting out yourself. But do you think to the Newcastle fans and the shirt, it is still the black and white stripes?
Well, it's just not what you get into football to do,
Of
is
course
it?
not.
To do sort of corporate investigations into foreign.
But it's utterly fascinating what you've just described.
What's your favourite shirt?
My shirt,
What's your favourite ever football shirt?
my probably favourite would be something like the Denmark 1986,
Yeah, that was a classic, wasn't it?
like
Come on.
Preble Elkiar and all of that kind of stuff. But again, it's just nostalgia. What about you?
Be a Villa one. Well, like Muller yogurts, Acorns Children's Hospice was a good one. These sort
When
of
was that?
That was like
What era
mid
was that?
2000s. Martin O'Neill actually just ghost wrote a book for Martin O'Neill.
Martin O'Neill, really?
Yeah. But just that era, just the idea of sponsors being a bit fun and well, not fun, but a children's hospice, a local charity that does great work. It's for quite a nice
Are
thing.
those days gone?
Well, probably because you're just leaving money on the table, really. In these days of financial rules and whatever else, to choose a charity sponsor rather than tens of millions you are just fundamentally shooting yourself in the foot, and you'll be able to afford less good players. So, I mean, you do. So Nottingham Forest had United Nations Refugee Charity recently, but that was because they couldn't get a sponsor. I think they'd set their price too high, couldn't get a sponsor, and then halfway into the season, they're like, we might as well do a nice gesture. I'm not saying it's completely cynical, but they didn't have a sponsor, so you might as well put a charity on it.
Do you think the leveraging or the positioning of the shirt? So Arsenal do the thing with Idris, don't they? I think it's an anti-knife crime initiative. I might get that wrong.
Yeah, so it's all white.
Where it's all white, effectively. I think you've once said that the shirt is the greatest advert ever made, for example. So do you think being able to leverage him in that way is...
Yeah, I mean, that can only be a positive thing. I mean, I don't know how much effect that has on knife crime, but yeah, I mean, why not? And I think the stuff the Premier League does about racism and homophobia and women in football, I think you reach people that might be quite difficult to reach with a sort of earnest lecture or whatever. So I think that's a good thing, and that's how football can be a positive.
I think they get hauled over the coals for being performative, but why?
Yeah, I never really like that word, performative.
So if someone's pulling on their own club kit, if I'm pulling, I mean, I don't really wear United. We just wear black on the stands, really. But my son used to.
Well, that's the whole thing as well. Yeah,
it's a thing. Yeah. Is that always, or is that just because it's very United?
Particularly, I think because I think with teams like United, Arsenal, Liverpool, there's extreme sensitivity about sort of tourists and plastics. And
right.
Whereas in a sort of Villa away crowd, there aren't any tourists. Do you know what I mean? There's no, but
you've got brilliant support as well.
Well, it's just that things are changing slightly, but there are very few people who are from Singapore or whatever who come to, not to sort of, there's a perfectly legitimate thing to do, but there's not as much sensitivity as there is with those clubs with those huge global fan bases, which I think clubs are wrestling with, and it's a very sensitive topic.
Yeah, tell us more about that, because you must witness that firsthand, and it is a sensitive topic.
You wouldn't be a top, team at the top of the Premier League without that at the moment. Or it's also like it's never going to change. So wishing it away is a sort of pointless. But also, I've spent time with with Manchester United fans in Mumbai in India about 3 years ago, and it was I can't remember what game it was. The game was against Fulham.
Oh,
But
right.
they were like diehard fans.
Yeah.
And what was interesting about them is that they do not want Manchester United to be this sort of Harlem Globetrotters, Disneyland,
No.
global that's made more palatable to them as Indians. They want it to be this club in Manchester in England that has this authentic local identity. That one or two of them have been there and have, desperate to show you the photos of it, and they want it to be rooted in a place that is foreign to them and different to their world. But the international fans, they don't want it to
No.
be changed for them in that sense.
No. And nor should it be.
No,
That feels right.
Yeah, yeah.
That's not a xenophobic
No, not at all. It's like if you follow.
that's-
I've got friends who follow NBA teams or whatever, and
Yeah.
they might have been to see them, and they don't want it to be.
Yeah.
They want to experience the culture as it is in the culture.
Yeah. And how much have you wrote and found out about, we've got city and state owned. Where are we at with that? So is football just basically laundering reputations now? Is that just as it is? Do we see it?
And I think Qatar's done an incredible job, really.
I agree.
The World Cup, and but I think I sounded the voice of optimism earlier, and I think the thing I'm most against and most pessimistic about is state-owned clubs, because it drives football into this inflationary spiral, and because a state has a bottomless pocket, effectively. When you look at the football economy, and a good player might be £100 million. A big wage might be, £300,000 a week, which is insanely mind-boggling to any normal person. But to an actual nation state, that's peanuts.
And City arguably normalised that. I think it was only last season during the winter window,
Yeah.
where the complete, effectively half-team rebuild during the winter window.
Yeah.
But it's kind of normalised, and by the end of the season, everyone's just lauding the fact that they're doing so well again, and actually willing them to be Arsenal in many quarters.
Yeah, but then you have Arsenal, who I hold no candle for Arsenal, but they are pretty run as a pretty effective business. But they're competing with Man City, and I think very admirably. They were on a smaller budget than Man City, but they have to pay similar amounts, and then it's a sort of food chain thing, and all the way down the pyramid you get that, and then right at the bottom of the Premier League or below, people are in the Championship. There's people getting paid £30,000-40,000 a week,
Yeah.
and the topic of footballers and wages is again quite a sensitive one, because I think football is actually one of the only meritocratic things in modern Britain. I think that you can be from a really difficult background and be at the pinnacle of your career and earn great money, and there's very few things left in that way. I think certainly not in the media, certainly not in all sorts of corporate jobs.
Never thought about that.
Yeah, and and like, do they deserve it? I mean, the word deserve is a funny one, but it's hard to begrudge someone who comes from a difficult background and becomes rich. It's better than someone getting rich because their dad got them in the door. You're never going to get into a top football team because of who your dad is. I think people like Erling Haaland, and his dad was a footballer, so I'm sure it helps when you're at a very early age, but you're not going to become Erling Haaland because of who your dad is. So I do buy that argument, but I also think the money is so crazy now, and they're so far removed from the sort of communities that they live in, that it is just. And then you get this. I've used this phrase before, of the inflationary spiral of them getting paid so much means you need to take in more money in the form of TV subscriptions, ticket prices, dodgy sponsors, and it's just.
Would you be concerned that that's going to pop? Or I know this has been a much discussed.
Well, I think there's a breaking
topic,
point with things like ticket prices, and less so at a club like Manchester United that has a global fan base. But I noticed at Villa, there was a game a few years ago at Man City, and you put the price up by £10 and people
Of course.
stop going. They can't afford it. The difference
It
between
was United as well
70 and
about a
80,
season and a half ago, and they were in uproar. In fact, someone like Mitten, I mentioned earlier, was a huge thing. You sat down with Ratcliffe to discuss it. It's a big deal. These are working.
Yeah, and I think also with Manchester United, you're probably not going to get empty seats because the global demand is so high.
1 million%.
But you change the composition of who is in the seats, and you get far fewer of the local people that are doing it all their lives, and you get more international fans, which isn't a criticism of the international fans as individuals, but it means you'll get less singing, you'll get less, the sort of folk memory disappears. If everyone there is someone who's on holiday, not people who go every week.
100%.
I was in Argentina, in San Lorenzo, which is an incredible club, and I was deep in the ultras, and everyone was singing these songs about the Malvinas, the Falklands, and not mainly it's just about their team, but I wasn't singing because I don't speak Spanish. But and I had an amazing time. But if half of the stand was people like me, then it wouldn't be.
But I think
What it
you're
was.
raising such an interesting point, and for me, there is a knock-on effect. There is a reason. I've seen what we've been kind of hypothesizing for a couple of years now. It's felt basically like a bit like when you came out of COVID, where this clamour for human experience and physical connection and real kind of experiences and moments there's a sense of pride. People are leaning into their cultural identities from their local town. They're leaning into their accent. They proudly call themselves Brummies or Scousers. Like they want to be known as that. So I find that very football.
Yeah.
Very and strangely
Yeah, I
Although I'm
hadn't really thought about the
describing
music link before,
tribalism, it's
yeah.
strangely uniting. So all of those I find super positive, but again, they feel quite antithetical to what you've just describing with a stadium full of people who aren't necessarily from there. And I almost hate saying
Well, I
it like
think
that.
maybe the energy goes lower down the football pyramid. I think it's absolutely thriving.
Tell us more about that.
Well, the Championship, the league below the Premier League, has the average attendance has basically doubled in the last 10, 15 years.
Really?
Really low down to non-league, incredible crowds. I keep meaning to get down to Halesowen Town. I've got a mate who goes, it's outside Birmingham, but it's like they're getting a couple of thousand every week, and it's like really low. And the football's no good. It's not. You don't go to see great football. It's community. And it has this element to it which the Premier League has kind of lost, which is, I mean, first you can drink. I think it's a big appeal. You can
Fabulous, yeah.
but you can just wander down. It costs very little. It's local. It's sociable. You can stand with your mates. And
I almost see them like a different sport.
yeah, I
Like,
think they're complementary products. They're not
yeah.
substitutes. Yeah,
But I adore it, by the way. And my local club is Hampton and Richmond. It's the point.
I've been there.
Literally take the
Yeah,
dog,
yeah.
and it's very sweet and cute in the middle
Yeah.
of very nice little area. But it's quite lively, and then you get people from Whitehawk, whoever, coming
Yeah,
down
yeah,
with their
yeah.
ultras, drums, and
Yeah, and often like teenage boys and like
loads.
you know, and I've been on the train with sometimes where, frankly, behaving a bit obnoxiously, and you see some sort of people touching a bit, and you know, I'm not justifying bad behaviour, but you think it's great these lads are not just sitting on TikTok all day.
I think that's a huge thing.
yeah.
My son and all his mates were part of it. He knows
Really,
loads
yeah.
who go down from the age of 14 to like their age now 17. It's a thing. It's being a part of it, and they are frankly priced out / unable to get tickets.
And
for
it's really hard to sit with your friends, you know.
almost impossible. So that feels positive. Do you
Yeah, I
think
think it's
that
really
feels rejuvenative, and that we might see more of that? And
Yeah.
is that replicated in other countries, by the way? Excuse me.
Not really. I mean, I wrote something for The Economist a few weeks ago about the sort of Premier League boom, and that covered the non-league boom. I think it's hugely positive. And I also think Britain can feel like there's such a stagnant, depressing country at times, and you know, it's constantly changing prime ministers, and there aren't many sort of success stories in business or whatever else. But football, I think, is a huge success story.
I agree. Tell us more, because that was a brilliant piece.
You mentioned other countries. I mean, Germany would, I think, be the closest parallel. But in Spain, Italy, France, they just don't have the same culture. And England has always had this deep away culture. I mean, Scotland too. Scotland is the best, the highest per capita attendance in the world is Scotland.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah. And
Really?
partly of it's geography. So England's pretty small. And if you look at all the league clubs, Plymouth fans share this because they just such on a limb, or whatever league they're in. But basically, if you draw a line between London and Liverpool, Manchester, you know, through the West Midlands, most teams are there. And actually, an away, it's a day trip. All of it is a day trip. And of course, you know, you've got Newcastle, but most away, you can do away trips and it's a day trip. And most countries don't really have that. You know, Spain, you have Madrid and then Barcelona and then clusters of it. It's just really massive distances without much in between. And we moan about our trains, and I'm definitely moan about them a lot, but it is pretty quick to get between most of our big cities. So just the geography of England, I think, is a huge factor. You know, you get like middle-aged men who probably don't get out of the house that much, or are probably negative and pessimistic in various ways. And then every Saturday they'll go and support their team, and they'll be, you know, talk about mental health and loneliness or whatever. And I think it's an incredibly positive thing for many people. And they wouldn't view it in those sort of terms and would probably be very dismissive of talking about it as sort of wellness or whatever. But I think it's a great thing for many people.
Bringing it slightly back down, you dug into crypto and fan tokens and all of that. I want to touch on that because I don't know much about that space. And
yeah, I mean, I've not really had my head in that world for 2 or 3 years now.
So that was the early stuff you were writing, was that right?
Yeah, that was sort of 21, 22.
Right.
There was a huge boom in it. And I just sort of thought it was all a massive scam, to be honest. And like, there was so much nonsense spouted about it.
Yeah.
And I was just pretty sort of, called out a lot of stuff pretty early on for being just total nonsense. And I think it's aged badly. But one of the stories in the book is I go to Istanbul, I meet a man who lost 3 months' wages on a Paul Pogba token, a dragon pushed by Paul Pogba on his feed. And it was really
God,
sad.
I think I remember that.
Yeah, I know his cousin told him it would be a great investment, and obviously it seems incredibly stupid in hindsight. But this guy was pretty. I actually messaged him about a year ago, and the book came out and said, you know, how's it all going? Because I got all his permission to write his story, but it was quite hard to get someone's permission because people are so embarrassed. People are like, oh, how do you tell your wife that you've lost month's wages on a football token? But this guy was very upfront, and he spoke to me, and then my editor was like, just go there. Like, so I went to Istanbul and interviewed him in a cafe, and he told me his life story, and it was a fascinating story. But this idea that footballer, he just thought this footballer with 100 million followers, of course it's going to be, and obviously that seems, from our background and whatever, maybe that seems silly, but he was devastated, and this sum of money was such a big sum for him, and he was like a motorbike courier. And eventually he managed to kind of pull himself back up financially. But it kind of ruined his life.
I mean, it's tragic. I guess unsurprising, Pogba aside, players full stop being able to use their following to advertise for brands full stop. That's just the thing, isn't it? And therefore, do you see that? Well, hydration breaks in the World Cup sponsored by Gatorade, Powerade, can't remember.
Yeah, I watched that. I was in Italy for that first England game against Croatia, and obviously I had to try quite hard to find a pub showing football in Italy during the World Cup. But the halftime breaks, the hydration full of adverts for Jose Mourinho selling eSIMs or something. Whereas here, they're not showing ads during the hydration break.
But even then, it's already changed the format of the game.
Mm.
As in those first couple of games in the World Cup, everyone was looking a bit. People weren't even interacting during it.
No, and
Suddenly,
it's like
coaches
a
like,
coaching break.
oh wow, we're having a full coaching break. Likewise, the broadcasters spin back to the studios, even if they're not advertising per se. It's an entirely separate kind of moment that they're playing out.
Yeah, and I think that for me, the worst thing about hydration breaks is some other sports are kind of episodic. They're like an NFL game. And I was in America a while ago and watched an NFL game in a bar with I don't really know much about it, but you don't watch it for most of the time. It's like you sort of the screen's there and something's happened. You sort of talk to your friends and you look up and but most of the time there isn't any action. But football is different. For 45 minutes, it's a sustained tension, and the tension builds, and often not much can happen. And 20, 30 minutes go by, and you might be hanging on to a lead, or your team really need a goal, and you're kind of like, and then you have this moment of release that's a goal or a amazing save or whatever, which is quite a different experience actually to many sports.
1,000,000%.
And the hydration breaks disrupt that.
Yeah.
And they don't have this building up. Remember I think it was the Brazil-Morocco game. The tension was Morocco were playing really well.
Yeah.
And they were the underdogs. And then the hydration break happened, and then they've swung to Brazil.
So now it's almost by stealth. So is that it done? Is every World Cup now going to be split into quarters? That
I'm sure it will, yeah. I mean, the FIFA's is a completely unaccountable body. It can do what it wants. I mean, the next World Cup's going to be in Spain, Portugal, and Morocco in the middle of the summer. So that's going to be very hot. And not all of those stadiums are going to be air conditioned, or none of them probably. So I'm sure we'll have it in the next World Cup. Morocco is really interesting. It's trying to do a Dubai, basically. It's trying to.
I didn't know that.
It's quite a poor country in many respects, but it's trying to jump up the development ladder by becoming. I mean, it's got it makes cars, for example. A load of cars that ship to Europe are made in Morocco because it's cheaper to hire people in Morocco than it is in Spain or whatever. So, and it's very close. So you just ship the cars, but it's trying to become, and it's amazing. And the roads are incredible. And it's building this infrastructure really quickly. But betting on football is often, Brazil and South Africa tried it, building these amazing stadiums. Stadiums in themselves are not going to drive economic growth. But the thing is, the World Cup is such hot property, and so many people want a piece of it, that you have this. It's in 3 countries. 3 other countries are hosting the opening games. It's just there's too much.
That feels bizarre.
Yeah, it is bizarre. And Paraguay, there's probably some favour to someone, but. And they're going to build this incredible stadium, I believe, in Paraguay for one game. That'll be a group game.
What?
But the next one is in Saudi Arabia in 2034.
And you're saying that with your eyebrows raised.
Well, I mean, yeah, Saudi Arabia. But the thing is, if you want to host a World Cup, you do it in either a country that has loads of great stadiums already, like England or Spain or the USA, or you want to do it in a dictatorship where you can just build a load of stadiums without any aggro. It's going to be difficult to host a World Cup somewhere like Brazil or South Africa that hosted in 2010 and 14 because you have to spend billions of taxpayers' money on stadiums. And in a democracy, people say, hang on a minute, why are we doing that? The schools are crumbling, the hospitals are crumbling, our nurses need a pay rise. Why are you spending billions on a stadium that's only going to get used once?
And so do you reckon, and I'm being terrible putting you on the spot on these things, but yeah, that the England infrastructure, 1996 stadiums, which I look back on now, but what was it, Old Trafford and Hillsborough, Villa Park,
but they weren't full. Like there's a semi-final at Old Trafford.
No,
I believe.
You're kidding me.
No, obviously the England games were, but there was so much less demand for football. And Old Trafford, it was Czech Republic against.
I find that incredible.
It was. You can see empty seats. So if you go back on the YouTube video, and the group games, the lesser group games, empty seats galore. And I think that's another thing people romanticize the old days. Like, football has come off. Football has been like a V shape since World War II in this country, in terms of the popularity of it. And the 80s were the dark days of Hillsborough, and there's violence and racism and hooliganism.
And it also wasn't on the telly at one point. When I was a kid, it wasn't on the telly for one season, maybe 2. You'll know better. But you couldn't watch football. Do you think though? So pulling it back to the political kind of crossover part. So let's talk Saudi. So prior to this US World Cup, like we were talking about, And I was the first one banging the drum of concern, saying it said Trump World Cup and wherever you stand politically, I worry he'll dominate the headlines. We had worries in the UK. I think England has a lot of cynicism around the game anyway, with things like VAR and knowledge.
Yeah.
America, I think, had an approach of, okay, there's quite a front row culture. Kim K, Serena watching it at Inter Miami with Beckham. Like, there's a bit of the basketball LeBron vibe that they were going
for. The one in LA when it was just like Brad Pitt.
Yeah,
like
right?
Leo DiCaprio, yeah.
Saudis, as far as I've understood, and people I know are out there and working out there are like, we've got this coming. This is mad exciting.
Yeah.
So, on one hand, I want to be purist and go, isn't that wicked for those people there? Isn't that a fabulous thing? What's the reality?
Well, I mean, Saudi Arabia is an incredibly brutal, autocratic monarchy, dictatorship, whatever you want to call it. It's changing very quickly. And I think it's also like, I think it's different to Qatar in that Qatar was basically, no one lived there until there was nothing 30 years ago. Whereas Saudi has a proper football culture. It has, it does relatively well at World Cups. It beat Argentina the other year. So it's not like a complete, and there's a very young population which I think are interested in football. So I think it's important not to completely dismiss that and be like, oh, it's all just sort of fake and in the desert, because it's a real culture there. But at the same time, and I think the interesting kind of liberalisation of Saudi Arabia is interesting because there's a lot. They held a comedy festival there recently. There's, people talk about, women are walking around not wearing the veil, which would have been crazy 5 years ago. But in terms of politically, in terms of can you criticise the government or the crown prince, that is just completely separate, and you absolutely cannot. So.
And how do you feel personally? Try and take your knowledge out of personally then about our game.
Yeah, and I think there's certainly a bit of that. And being English, I think, and a lot of other countries kind of hate that.
I guess I don't mean even English. I mean, I know it's, I guess, the world game of fans who just want the football part. Do you think it's right that it's allowed to be played, therefore, in an environment like that will do wherefore wonders, right, for the government that you just described?
Yeah, no, I don't, because it's just it's a propaganda vehicle ultimately, isn't it? And it's going to help this sort of probably autocratic state. People sometimes said, I remember the time the Newcastle deal, people said, oh, isn't it great to like shine a light on these things? It's like, no, it helps the regime because it sort of deepens the regime in many ways. So no, I don't think it's good that it's there.
Are they going to pull out of owning Newcastle, by the way?
I have no inside information, but it seems like they're getting slightly cold feet about the golf, the live golf and various other things. But yeah, I mean, Newcastle are very crippled by all these. I mean, they've made some bad mistakes in the transfer market, but they have sold a lot of players recently. Yeah, it's interesting to see where Saudi goes. I mean, I think they have been quite clever in various ways in terms of making their own Saudi league. They've sort of got 4 teams that are quite good, whereas in China 10 years earlier, which I talk about in the book, Guangzhou Evergrande just won everything, and that's boring as a spectator. Whereas if you have sort of 4 teams that are good, it's more competitive. They haven't just put all the good players in one team.
Someone wrote recently, you might know because I've forgotten, but they were saying that I think they called it like the clubification of the national game, and they were referring, I think, to the money being poured into the States and the hiring of Pochettino and the infrastructure around it, and they were making the point of that's just like a PSG or a City, and they were meaning it negatively. It shouldn't. It should come from the nation, if you like. I'm not sure where I sit on that because I think, well, it's a reality.
I think hiring a good manager, I think there's anything wrong with that. I mean, Qatar tried to, when they knew they were hosting the World Cup and they wanted to do well at it, they tried to just naturalise a load of Brazilians who weren't quite good enough for the Brazilian team, and then FIFA actually stepped in and said, tighten the rules on nationality.
I didn't realise that. So I'd love you to quickly mention what you're working on at the moment. First of all, where can people find you and read about you? We've mentioned The Economist, More Than a Shirt.
Thank you. Yeah. So I always try and plug one thing. It's the Substack newsletter. So I do a weekly newsletter. I mean, during the World Cup, the schedule has been off, but yeah, it's free. I'd write every week, and I'd love people to sign up to that.
How do you find Substack? It's a great community, isn't it?
Yeah, it's good. I'm enjoying it, and I really like the kind of rhythm of forcing myself to have an idea once a week, because you can get so bogged down in just being busy with things that it's like, right, I've got to write something for a Friday.
Yeah, and if you want another book?
Yeah, so I'm writing a second book. I'm a bit coy about the specifics because I haven't finished it yet, but it's going to be out next June, and I've been, I think next June.
So you've got a deadline.
Yeah, well, I've got to write it by September, so I've got a cabin in the middle of nowhere in Scotland for a few days in August.
Oh, that sounds great.
To break the, it's
Is that
terrible.
the normal creative writing process?
I've never done anything like this before. I just have so much to do. I've been so busy during the World Cup that I need to just break the back of it.
Nice.
But yeah, it's about football and politics and history, and I've been to Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, Senegal, Morocco, various places in Europe, and yeah, it's bigger. It's more ambitious than this. It's like the biggest thing I've ever done, and I'm really excited about it.
I knew this would be the case. I adore this conversation. I could definitely keep going for about 8 hours. Joey, thank you so much for coming in on the show.
Thanks for having me. Really enjoyed it.
If you enjoyed this week's show, please follow us on Instagram at StoryCodePod. Subscribe on Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Trust me, It really does help. Storyco is a Telltale Industries production. It's recorded in Studio One at the brilliant TYX Studios here in King's Cross. It's produced by Jago Lee, assistant produced by Nellie Batt. Special thanks to Craig Hepsinstall, Jack Freegar, Tyler Newton, Issa Gibson. I'm James Kirkham. This has been a masterclass in how storytelling pays in this modern media landscape. Go out, tell a story that matters, and we'll see you next week.